She went to Colombia at the invitation of the vice president, a woman whose background is extremely poor, left-wing woman who hoped that Meghan would contribute to her charities for children.
What if the fairy tale wasn't a fairy tale at all, but a carefully staged illusion that's now collapsing in real time? What if the woman once adored across the globe is now at the center of a narrative that's turning darker, louder, and impossible to ignore? Because right now, everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle is being questioned, dissected, and, according to Tom Bower, completely rewritten. She entered the royal family like a modern myth, a Hollywood actress stepping into centuries of tradition, marrying Prince Harry, capturing hearts, headlines, and history in one move. It looked perfect, too perfect. The cameras loved her, the public defended her, the narrative untouchable. But here's the twist no one saw coming, or maybe no one wanted to see. That image, that polished, glowing persona is now cracking. And the deeper you look, the more those cracks start to feel like something far more serious. Because according to Bower's revelations, this wasn't just a simple transition gone wrong. No, this was a calculated leap that didn't land the way it was supposed to. The dream, freedom, independence, power outside the palace walls. But reality? A slow unraveling that's playing out in public, piece by piece, deal by deal, moment by moment. At first, it looked like a master plan. Big contracts. Big names, Spotify, Netflix, millions on the table, a new empire in the making. They weren't just leaving royalty, they were redefining it, or at least that's what the world was told. But then something strange started happening. The deals didn't grow, they disappeared. Quietly at first, then loudly. Spotify, gone. Netflix projects falling apart. And suddenly the same couple who once commanded global attention began struggling to hold it. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because Bower doesn't just point to bad luck, he suggests something deeper, a pattern, a disconnect between image and reality. The kind of disconnect that doesn't show up overnight, but when it does, it hits hard. Think about it. How does a couple with that level of visibility, that level of support, that level of opportunity start losing momentum so fast? What changed? Was it the strategy, the expectations, or something far more personal, something embedded in the way their story was built from the beginning? Because as those deals collapsed, something else started rising. Doubt, questions, whispers turning into conversations, conversations turning into headlines. And suddenly, the narrative wasn't about a bold escape anymore, it was about survival, relevance, damage control. And the more Bower speaks, the clearer the picture becomes. He paints a version of their post-royal life that feels less like a triumph and more like a struggle masked as success, a reinvention that didn't quite stick, a brand that's slipping, slowly but visibly. What's even more fascinating, almost unsettling, is how quickly the tone around them has shifted. The same public that once defended every move is now watching more critically, not with blind admiration, but with sharp curiosity. Because when the story starts changing, people don't just listen, they investigate. And that's exactly what's happening here. Because behind the glamorous headlines, there's a growing sense that this wasn't just about leaving the royal family. It was about building something bigger, something stronger, something independent. But instead of rising, that vision seems to be stalling. And then comes the real question, the uncomfortable one, the one no one wanted to ask at the beginning. Was the royal exit a bold move or a miscalculation? Because if this was supposed to be the beginning of a new empire, why does it feel like everything is slipping instead of expanding? Why does every new chapter seem to come with setbacks instead of success? And that's where Bower's perspective becomes impossible to ignore. He suggests that what we're seeing isn't just a series of unfortunate events, it's the result of deeper issues, expectations that didn't match reality, ambitions that collided with limitations, a carefully curated image that's now struggling to hold under pressure. And suddenly, the story isn't about what they left behind, it's about what they're failing to build. But it doesn't stop there, because as the professional setbacks grow, something even more damaging begins to unfold. The image, the persona, the version of Meghan that people believed in, that relatable, warm, effortless figure, is now being questioned in ways that feel personal. Because when insiders start speaking, when NDAs begin to break, when stories leak from behind the scenes, it changes everything. And now people aren't just watching, they're reevaluating. Who is she really? The activist, the outsider, the misunderstood figure? Or is there another version, one that was never meant to be seen? Because according to Bower, the gap between perception and reality is widening. And the more it widens, the harder it becomes to control the narrative. And maybe that's the real turning point here, not the failed deals, else. Not the media backlash, but the moment when the story slips out of your hands and starts being told by someone else. Because once that happens, it's almost impossible to get it back. And right now, it feels like that's exactly where things are heading. But here's where it gets even more intense, because this isn't just about reputation anymore. It's about identity, about how they see themselves and how the world sees them now. And if Bauer is even partially right, then what we're witnessing isn't just a downfall, it's a transformation. One that's far more complicated and far more controversial than anyone expected. And the deeper we go, the more one question refuses to stay quiet. Is this the result of external pressure or internal choices? Because the answer to that question changes everything. And just when you think the story couldn't get more intense, it twists again. Because what if the biggest damage to Meghan Markle's image didn't come from outside criticism, but from inside her own carefully controlled world? What if the people closest to her, the ones who saw everything, are the very ones now pulling the curtain back? Because that's exactly what makes Tom Bauer's revelations feel so explosive. It's not just speculation, it's patterns, staff stories, broken silence, and the kind of leaks that don't just shake a reputation, they redefine it. For years, Meghan built an image that felt almost untouchable. The relatable Californian woman, the compassionate activist, the modern royal who understood people. It was powerful. It was effective. It worked. Until suddenly it didn't. Because when multiple narratives start clashing, when the public version and the private version don't quite match, the illusion begins to crack. And once that crack appears, it spreads fast. Bauer describes a growing tension behind the scenes. Staff dissatisfaction, non-disclosure agreements being broken, whispers of control, expectations, and difficult dynamics that never made it into the glossy interviews. And here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't just question stories like that. They remember them. They repeat them. They build new opinions around them. And that's where everything shifts. Because now the narrative isn't just about Meghan being misunderstood, it's about whether she was ever understood correctly in the first place. Think about how quickly admiration can turn into skepticism. One moment you're inspiring millions. The next, you're being analyzed from every angle, every move, every statement, every silence. And suddenly, the same traits that once made you admired start being interpreted differently. Confidence becomes calculation. Independence becomes ambition. Ambition becomes something else. And then comes the most controversial layer of all, the ambition. Because according to Bauer, Meghan didn't just want to fit into the royal system, she wanted to rise within it. Not quietly, not gradually, but significantly. And that's where the comparison that shook everything begins. The idea that she believed she deserved more influence, more recognition, even more than Catherine, Princess of Wales. Now pause for a second, because this isn't just gossip. This is the kind of claim that changes how people interpret everything that came before it. Every decision, every tension, every reported disagreement. Suddenly, it's no longer about adapting to royal life, it's about competing within it. And that competition, it doesn't exist in isolation. It creates friction. It creates division. And according to Bauer's narrative, it may have been one of the hidden forces behind Meghan's eventual exit. Because imagine stepping into a system where roles are already defined, futures already decided. Prince William was always destined for the throne. Catherine was always positioned beside him. That structure doesn't bend. It doesn't adjust. It doesn't make room for new interpretations of power. And if Meghan expected it to, then maybe the clash was inevitable from the start. But here's where it gets even more layered. Because this isn't just about Meghan. It's about Harry too. And his relationship with the royal family, especially with Queen Camilla, adds another layer of tension that feels almost impossible to ignore. Bauer suggests that Harry sees Camilla not just as a distant figure, but as someone who actively worked against him and Meghan. A belief that doesn't just create distance, it deepens wounds that were never fully healed. And once those wounds reopen, everything becomes personal. Because now, it's not just about leaving the royal family. It's about feeling pushed out, misunderstood, undermined. And that belief, whether fully accurate or not, becomes a powerful force. It shapes decisions, it shapes interviews, it shapes the entire narrative they continue to present to the world. And this is where Bauer introduces one of his most controversial observations, the idea that Harry and Meghan's story has become anchored in victimhood, not as a moment, but as a pattern. Because every time a deal falls apart, every time criticism rises, the narrative circles back to the same place, the same conflict, the same grievances, the same unresolved tension with the royal family. And here's the paradox. It works. because it keeps them relevant. It keeps the spotlight on them. It keeps people talking. But at the same time, it traps them because the more they rely on that narrative, the harder it becomes to move beyond it. It's like being stuck in a loop, one that started as a chapter, but now feels like the entire story. And while all of this is unfolding, there's another battlefield quietly shaping their future, Hollywood. Because let's be honest, that was the next kingdom they were supposed to conquer. The place where titles don't matter, but influence does, where storytelling is power, where reinvention is possible. But instead of dominance, they're facing resistance. Their projects aren't landing the way they expected. Their public image isn't translating the same way it once did. Even their charitable efforts, once seen as genuine, are now being viewed through a more skeptical lens. And that shift, it's subtle, but it's powerful. Because once people start questioning intent, everything changes. Was it about impact or image? Was it about helping or positioning? Those questions don't just linger, they grow. And the more they grow, the harder it becomes to rebuild trust. And now, the dream that once felt so certain feels fragile. Because Hollywood doesn't operate on past titles. It operates on current relevance. And if that relevance starts fading, even slightly, the industry moves on fast. So where does that leave them? Caught between two worlds. No longer fully part of the royal system they left behind. Not fully established in the new empire they tried to build. Existing in a space that feels uncertain, unstable, constantly shifting. And that's the real tension at the heart of this story. Because this was never supposed to happen. This was supposed to be the ultimate reinvention, the bold escape that turned into global success. But instead, it's becoming something far more complicated. A story filled with contradictions, setbacks, and questions that don't have easy answers. And now, as Bauer's revelations continue to circulate, the public is left watching something that feels less like a comeback and more like a crossroads. Because the future? It's unclear. Will Meghan and Harry rebuild their image? Will they find a new direction that finally works? Or will the weight of everything, the expectations, the criticism, the unresolved tensions continue pulling them back into the same cycle? Because one thing is certain, the story isn't over, not even close. In fact, it might just be entering its most revealing chapter yet. And the real question isn't what happened, it's what happens next.